Hello, everybody. We still have folks who are continuing to join the session, but in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started for you. Just a note to those who are participating or who registered for this session, the content here in the presentation will be made available to you after the session, as will the recording of this particular presentation. So first of all, we'd like to thank you for joining this webinar on CMMC 2.0, what those newly announced changes mean to you and how you can continue to prepare to be ready for those changes as someone servicing the defense industrial base. My name is Tom Leahy. I am the SVP of Sales and Business Development with SureShield. I have on with me our CEO, Sanjay Kumar, and our CTO, Chande Bilagu. I will be conducting the components of the presentation, and they will be available to help answer questions you may have as we go through this particular presentation. So in today's session, as all of us are anxious and know the recently announced changes to the CMMC cybersecurity maturity model process. We're going to talk a little bit about what the current requirements are today, your basic requirements to participate in defense-related contracts, what these changes are that have come or are coming and what that means to you as a supplier. And then we'll talk a little bit about what remains in place and what your company should be doing to continue to meet current requirements, as well as those that will be coming in the future. And then we'll spend a minute or so talking about our company SureShield and how we can help you in those processes both today and in the future as the new requirements get rolled out. And then we'll take any questions. And at the end of the session, you will be receiving a follow-up email with the content. Anyone that's interested in trialing any of the solutions that we can have to help you with it will be available to you as well. But we would ask a reach out back to us if there is an interest for that, and we will follow up accordingly for that. So let's go ahead and get started. And hopefully we'll be able to buy you all back a little time. It shouldn't take the full hour. But as you know, the current compliance requirements today for the DIB, currently all providers that are working with the DoD need to complete the NIST 800-171 assessment. Today as well, those scores still need to be submitted to the Supplier Performance Risk System, the SPRS, and they will continue to require a system security plan and a plan of action and milestone report made available to them in that process. This affects all 300,000 suppliers to the DIB, and that in essence will not change. As we know, over the past 2 years, the CMMC and the DoD was rolling out this new cybersecurity maturity model. And really part of the significant intent of that was to create even more what you might call cyber posture, as well as to try to deal with some of the issues that came from the self-assessment process, meaning there were organizations at times that may have submitted an attestation that they were meeting the requirements, and then lo and behold, those groups were getting hacked and causing security issues. And so the whole cybersecurity maturity model was rolled out as a means to strengthen the cyber posture of those that are serving the Department of Defense. Most likely, when programs like this get rolled out, they start in one area and get expanded to others. So what was formed here very likely was going to be looked at as a means to roll out on a more global basis in terms of any type of government contract. But for the most intent and purpose was to strengthen that process and put in what they would call an accreditation authority board that would do those reviews of anybody that was getting CMMC certified. So there was going to be a requirement for anyone that was in this to go through a third party basically audit and assessment by what they call the C3 PAOs. And what has now changed as a result of that, and I think, for many reasons, for many good reasons, folks listened and said that they felt that this process could potentially be too costly for providers that were in this, that the levels that may need to be maintained were a little bit more difficult to understand, perhaps. No one denying the fact that regardless of who you were, you needed to be providing, the best ways to protect the data that you are dealing with. But there was a review process of what was the intended original, I would call it CMMC 1.0. And the department just recently came back, as many of you are aware, with changes to that process. So what are some of those changes? The original process included what they called, had 5 different maturity levels, from level 1 to level 5. And really, as you were progressing through those levels, the type of practices you need to have in place became more stringent based upon the type of critical information you were dealing with. So to simplify this process somewhat, they have since then moved from 5 levels to 3. And they've essentially are going to use the NIST 800-171 framework as a backbone, as it's been something very well recognized, not only in the DoD, but throughout the federal government. I think they came to a conclusion that there wasn't necessarily the need to continue to add additional controls on top of that NIST 800-171 process. So what it essentially is doing is eliminating what you might have called the CMMC only controls. In the next slide, I'll get into that as an example. And it's going to focus on the NIST cybersecurity standards. Where one thing has changed is it's going to now allow for a certain level of providers to continue to do self-assessments for contracts, particularly if those contracts don't have information that might be deemed critical to national security. So those of you that are dealing with FCI type data, they will even mark some of the CUI data that's not considered critical and give organizations the process of doing attestations. Now, they are going to put a lot more, I would say, teeth into that process. So there will most likely be an executive within your organization. That will need to be signing off on that attestation if you fit into the category that allows you to do self-assessments and attestations. And that executive sign-off is saying that I am attesting that we are doing what we said we are going to do. And there has been indications that, these things now could potentially result in issues around false claims, meaning if someone within your organization or someone else had noticed that you'd attested to something that was false, they can blow that whistle and be subject to those types of penalties and fines. Because while they're trying to make the process, I think, more palatable for those that are supplying, they certainly are not wanting to get away from the very critical requirement and need for making sure that we are following good cyber practices, particularly since we know and see how significantly this is continuing to ramp up. There's more and more threats out there all the time. So It will allow for, as we said, for some self-assessment for certain folks. It's going to allow the use of a POAM for certain requirements, meaning you can't just submit a POAM with an indefinite timeline on when things are going to get done, or a very long timeline. So they're talking about, first of all, eliminating certain components that cannot go through a POAM. You'll have to have those pieces in place. And those items that they will allow, they're going to put a very strict timeline as to when they need, minimum timeline of when they have to be achieved, or I guess a maximum timeline. So of course, these changes have to go through another review process. So, there are information saying that this could take anywhere from 9 to 24 months. Now, we don't know yet whether that means that they're going to change the timeline for when everybody was supposed to go through this. If you remember, in the original CMMC level 1, there was the or CMMC 1.0, there was the need to complete this entire process by 2025. And I think they also recognized getting 300,000 organizations through that process was going to be a challenge. So under the proposed new structure, as you remember with level 1, there were 5 different levels, from what they called basic cyber posture, folks that were primarily just handling FCI or federal contract information, all the way up to these level 5. And at the level 3 practice, this is companies that were primarily dealing with, at 3 and above is folks that are dealing with critical CUI data. So they had extended that process from the 110, 800, 171 controls, and they'd added another 20 CMMC level controls. So now those have been removed. And as we said, NIST will continue to be the foundation for this process. So we've moved from a 5-level process down to a 3-level. And at the level 1, those will fall in line much like the level 1 processes that were expected under CMC model, the model 1.0. A couple of things to note here as you look to the right-hand side of this. This is going to be an annual process. So no longer is it just based upon whether you have a contract or you're trying to get a contract. It's going to be anyone that's supplying and doing this is going to have to do this on an annual basis if you are at a level 1. So it's important that you have good tools to actually regularly do those assessments, make the changes you need to make. And obviously there's going to be areas that are not going to allow you to modify or provide a POAM to say that you'll put these in place. Now what they're calling the level 2 advanced is really probably pretty much consolidating the level 2 and the level 3 areas. But at that base level, they're working off the NIST 110 controls. So for folks here today that have been submitting a NIST 800-171 assessment score, assume that you're going to see things very similar because you're going to be evaluated on those particular controls. What's a bit, I would say, kludgy, or sometimes it will shake out in terms of helping understand this, is that within the level 2 providers, there's going to be 2 kind of different layers. It's folks who are handling CUI that's not deemed, I guess, critical or critical to national security. And then there'll be another subset of folks within there that are dealing with CUI that is considered critical. So there will be a component of folks that qualify in the level 2 that will continue to be able to do this self-assessment process. Again, annually, it's not a static once in a while type thing. You're going to need to be submitting this on an annual basis, and you're going to need to have that executive sign off on this. Keeping in mind, anytime, there's always going to be new threats that get entered into an environment. So it's not something to be done kind of in a static basis. It's something that should be done regularly and continuously. There will be another set of folks that will fall into the need to have a third-party audit done. And this is where the C3PAOs will continue to play a role, because those organizations are going to have to go through that survey process, or excuse me, that assessment and certification process. And then at the highest levels of security, the level 3, they are going to be adding another set of NIST 800-172 controls on top of the NIST 800-171-110 controls. Those have yet to be determined or put out there yet. So what you can and what we will expect is that there will be some controls that fall into the 172 area that will be brought into this level 3. And anyone that's at that level 3, this is kind of the most highly sensitive, expert related information, will go through an assessment, but the assessing or accreditation or sign off body will no longer be the C3PAOs. It's going to be a government related group. So what does that mean in terms of some of the changes? So what are some of the, as we said, the eliminated requirements and changes? Level 2, as we said, in this new process of the 2.0 will be based on the NIST 800-171. Level 3 will add some additional controls that are yet to be determined. It eliminates, as we said, the CMMC controls, and really it's going to reduce the number of companies that are going to require a C3PAO certification. And as such, it also adds a new government oversight authority for the level 3, which was formerly the level 4 and 5. Now, we've heard some indications that the even within the DIB of close to 300,000, that there are close to 80,000 companies, they believe, that are going to need to still go through a level of certification, either with the C3PAO or with the government. Those others will have the self-assess, self-attestation process to go through. As we said, self-assessments and certifications, a subset of the level 2 companies will be allowed to use the annual self-assessments to demonstrate their compliance. And those would be companies who do not handle information that's deemed to be critical to national security. How that plays out in new awards, I think is still to be determined, but it's going to be more incumbent upon, I would say, the federal government or the DoD to indicate in those particular agreements what classify within that, what classifies as a level 2 self-assessment process. And what will be those that are in that level 2 that are deemed more critical. And those will have to go through a certification process. The POEMs, as we mentioned before, the government will potentially allow for some waiver process if they have an agreement out there that's considered mission critical. However, that waiver will remain very limited in duration. And it's not likely that they're going to want to do that at all. It's an incumbent, I would say it's incumbent upon you as an organization to make sure that you have the practices in place that need to be in place to meet either your level 2 or level 3 requirements. As I mentioned as well, they'll specify a subset of requirements that a POEM will not apply. When I say that is, you will not be able to put that on your POEM. If it's a requirement that they'll say this has to be in place before you can even do business with the government. So getting those things understood and fixed and in place right away is going to be important to you as a company that's servicing under those areas. And as just saying that there's going to be a number of things that will have to be in place prior to the award. So, sorry, let me go back. So that essentially leads to the major changes that have come out, right? And so what hasn't changed, and perhaps what should you be doing today to prepare for this to come, these changes to come? Clearly, and they've more than indicated that they are going to implement CMMC. All they are doing is, as we said, changing a little bit of the process for that. But the importance of cyber strength and cyber posture has not necessarily changed. I think what they're trying to do is also make sure that those that have been dedicated good suppliers are not overburdened with meeting these requirements, while at the same time enforcing that good cyber posture is going to need to be in place. So CMMC will be implemented, and really the only change there is to the process as we've outlined. The submission of your NIST 800-171 score to the SPRS today is still required. So, and it's going to be even more regular in the future, meaning that there's going to be that if you're able to do self-assessments, you're going to have to do those on a yearly basis. And so you should be regularly conducting your NIST 800-171 assessments. As you know, there is a infrastructure ecosystem that's been put into place for within the CMMC environment, the RPOs and those that are assisting in those, the RPs are excellent groups to be working with if you need those type of services or resources made available to you. And they today are already helping many organizations to make sure that they're NIST 800-171 compliant. So you'll need to continue to do that. You'll be required to do this yearly, and you'll need to update and create your POEM and SSP, and in the future understand how those may change. But today those are still required. It would be incumbent upon you to start looking at what maturity level you think your organization is going to fall into. Obviously, if you handle any controlled unclassified information, you'll be at a minimum of a level 2, and that's either at through a self-assessment or certification. And if you haven't done so already, you should really be going through the process of locating and evaluating what kind of data that you have, whether you've got those properly marked, and even if you don't, understanding the nature of that data and how critical that information may be, and getting it put in a manner that can be well protected. Because that will obviously, the primary goal of this was to make sure that critical information is protected. And ongoing, what I would say, cybersecurity hardening will continue to be an ongoing requirement. Your organization should be doing regular risk assessments. They should be doing regularly looking at security and vulnerability scans of the assets you have in your environment, understanding where vulnerabilities may be within that environment, and remediating those particular vulnerabilities. Those are all, current requirements of the whole NIST 800-171 process to begin with. So putting those processes in place and having those in place and doing those, as we said, on a continuous basis is important, because there's always new threats that are being introduced into the environment. That's why even doing an assessment itself is not something that should be done one time and put away. It should be something that you're continuously kind of looking at, identifying where there's gaps that you may have, and improving upon those gaps. So, as we mentioned, we wanted to talk just briefly about how SureShield, our company, can help with some of that, those components. So what we have done and had done before is we crosswalked the NIST 800-171 to what were the CMMC 1.0 frameworks. Essentially, we have continued and will continue to do the same thing. We don't know yet whether they're going to deem it. It doesn't necessarily make sense if they, but they may still deem new what they call CMMC controls, even though they're based upon the 800-171 framework. So within that, we've already created what would be considered the new CMMC 2.0 level 1 and level 2 frameworks. We already have the 171 controls. It's just understanding which of those the 172 controls will be added for that level 3 process. And those are typically going to impact, oftentimes larger companies. But we provide a tool set that can allow you to do any kind of assessment or audit of your environment in a more automated fashion that will also roll up the types of information you'll need for doing your self-assessment scoring, for creating your POAM and your SSP, and the likes. We also have software that can be used to identify CUI data in your environment. So particularly if you have done a process of marking that information, we have an endpoint solution that can run through and help you identify where all that data sits, how well it's protected, and allow you to actually put right rules on top of that to even further protect that critical information. And then as part of the overall regular strong cyber vulnerability posture, we have tools that can simplify the process for doing what we call vulnerability scans, identifying assets in your environment, pointing out to you where there's vulnerabilities, and not only that, but helping understand how to fix those, and really getting a significant, a good risk assessment score to help you understand where your biggest problems are and where the maximum bang can be for fixing those problems. And those are under the auspices of products. One's called Comply Shield, that is to help you with your 800-171 or CMMC 2.0 assessments or audits against those controls. That particular solution also can be used for a variety of different, if you're in healthcare for doing HIPAA-related audits, if you're in finance for doing finance-related audits that are required as well. Our security and vulnerability tool is called the Security Shield, and Hack Shield is the tool that will help identify CUI data. So we're hopefully have bought back some time for you. We're rolling to the end where we can begin to take questions. We believe that if there's an interest in using some of these solutions, we can continue to help you be ready for what you need to be doing today, which is things haven't changed with the NIST 800-171 process, and those tools are available today. And we are already prepared for the 2.0 changes because we've had those in place really from the beginning. So while some of those things have been modified, the basic needs and the basic components that will be part of that can be provided through folks like us. So in summary, 2.0 has changed some requirements. CMMC is still coming. It may be off a little bit longer in terms of when that final rule comes back in place again, but has not been any indication as of today that the timing as to when all the companies will need to either self-attest or get certified whether that has changed. And all of you that are a provider now are already familiar with the fact that you need to be doing the assessment score submission to the SPRS. You can assume that there was going to be, while they've relaxed perhaps the certification process for some companies, they're going to increase the teeth behind that, meaning, again, the folks that sign off within that organization that are attesting that they have the proper processes and have the proper cyber posture in place are doing it. If that is not the case, as we mentioned, that can come with very much more significant issues, loss of contracts, false claim act. The government's always looking for ways to recover money. So that you can assume, even though the process for this may have modified a bit, that the authority around that will not. And lastly, ways to make this a simpler process for you all is to leverage technology like ours to help you in that. And we've conducted these sessions quite a bit. We've had a number of suppliers that have reached out just for the pure use of using the Comply Shield framework for doing their assessments on their own company to make sure that they have a good understanding of where they are, what their compliance looks like, and what they need to do to fix items. So we're going to go ahead and now take on questions. As I mentioned, at the conclusion of the presentation, this content will be made available to all of you who have participated. If you would like more information from us on what we do, you can reach out to us at info@sureshield.com, sure-shield.com. You can visit our website at www.sure-shield.com, and we will be sending follow-up, as I said, information with this content and with this webinar content out to you. Should you have an interest in trialing any of the products, please reach out to us and we will have someone for the organization follow up with you to get you started. All of our tools are cloud-based, so they're very, very simple to turn on and begin to use. They do not take, there's not a lot of, there's very little what I would call implementation time. We like to make sure that our customers have a good sense of how to use the tool, so we, of course, handhold you through that process, but activating it and making it available to you is very, very simple. So with that, I see that we have a number of folks who have typed into the chat, and I believe folks have from our team have gone ahead and helped answer some of those, but please go to the Q&A section. If you have questions, you should see a toolbar in Zoom it's a Q&A section to answer or ask any of the questions that you may have. And I see that several of these questions have already been answered by folks from our organization. I do see a question about, can you perform the actual third-party certification? Our company cannot. When I say that, we are not the organizations that will do those third-party certifications. When you say a sign-off or certification through the new CMMC 2.0 process as outlined, will continue to be those ecosystem marketplace companies in CMMC that are called the C3PAOs. Now, we work in a couple of different ways with the SureShield products. Companies that have resources to actually do some of these components on their own can leverage these tools to help them get a good understanding of where they are, and also to help create, for the current process, the reports that are needed to be submitted to the SPRS. For those that are in need of organizations to help them perhaps do evaluations and get them ready for the certification process, if you go to the marketplace as well, you'll see organizations that are listed as RPOs, and those are the type of companies that can help in terms of getting, they're called registered provider organizations, and they're essentially can help organizations get prepared. And Chandi, I'm just seeing a few questions in here. If you can just validate for me that they were answered.
Yes, Tom, answering.
Okay. Yes, and I see someone had asked whether they'll be getting the materials. Yes, indeed, you will. I have another person who's asked whether we have templates that can be customized, and our answer is yes. We actually, that compliance framework, we have a number of what you would call frameworks already in place, but we also have a number of companies that we work with, organizations that might have some of their own customized assessments, and we are able to do that in the Comply Shield solution. For the person asking that question, if you'd like to reach out to us, and we can kind of help you understand how we can do that and provide customized templates as well. And I have one other question that I see in terms of, well, actually I see two other questions. One is the annual submission. So yes, if you're self-attesting, again, you will have to be doing this on an annual basis. So you can't just add the one that you had before. They're going to want to see what I would call the submission and the history. So the history behind what was done before. And that is something that's actually quite useful, again, in our Comply Shield tool, is as you do your assessments, obviously there's going to be areas that you're going to need to provide information as to how you scored something the way you scored it, and backup information that can support that answer. Sometimes you'll notice, much like in a POAM, you may have information that isn't currently in place that you're going to get in place. And once you've done that, you'll be updating. So our tool allows you to, it's really a continuous monitoring solution that can allow you to look at any point in time where you stand from a posture in a compliance standpoint. So much like the submission of the assessments are going to be annual, they are going to expect to see a progression of changes on that are indicating a stronger cyber posture. And just briefly, there's a question around the pricing of those tools. That is basically a monthly subscription for use of the frameworks that you're setting. And then of course, it comes with a whole bunch of different reports that can be utilized for internal purposes as well as for submission to the federal government. And Chandi, did you answer the question about the NIST guide? Yes, okay. So yes, we've actually, again, have mapped even what they're calling the level 1. The new controls, we've mapped them all under NIST to the appropriate levels that they will belong to. There's a question about, is the cost of SureShield product based on number of seats? The answer is no. It's just based upon the number of, we're talking about Comply Shield, it's based upon the frameworks that you're working with. So for instance, NIST is a framework, HIPAA is a framework, as an example. It's very economical. It's less than $1,200 a year, and that's giving you continuous. Now, a couple of our other solutions, the security and scanning and vulnerability management solution, is based upon the number of IP assets that are being scanned. So again, sometimes there are certain assets in an environment that don't necessarily require any kind of vulnerability scanning to be done on them. And there's those that are. We help you configure what needs to be done. And then the pricing is based upon the number of assets that are being scanned in that environment. And again, if there's interest, please reach out to us and we can help answer those questions or get you more information on pricing or on the products that you may have interest in. And we still have a few more minutes. It looks like there's a couple of open questions. So the question is about the annual basis of attestation certification. I believe that will be specified. Of course, anyone that's dealing with these now should, of course, have submitted their NIST 800-171 to the SPRS, but I'm assuming they will come out with a more regular timeline as to when that needs to be done. And then I see there's another question around products that provide real-time log data, and Chandi is going ahead and answering that question. And we still have a few more minutes in the session. If folks would want to continue, we'll leave this open because we still have a significant number of the participants that are still here. If you do have other questions, please go ahead and type those in. We have another one that's come in, I believe, Chandi. Yes, and so there is and Chandi is answering, I believe, Julie. Please reach out to us, or we'll make sure that we have your contact information, and we will reach out to you, Julie, without a problem. So there's another question about would the ability to execute ongoing contracts come under CMMC 2.0. We don't know what that date is yet, but I will.
Tom, it's still governed by the interim rule, which says for you to bid on projects or renew project contracts, you need to submit to SPRS. So that will keep going on.
Yes, yes, exactly. So the current requirements are still there, meaning you need to be submitting this to the SPRS. That hasn't changed. The rule around what we might call CMMC will have a different date once they've rolled that out. But under the interim rule, that you still need to continue to meet the NIST 800-171 requirements. You need to submit that to the SPRS, and you need to attach with that your SSP and your POEM. And then the question, Chandi, you're answering that question in terms of reverting to an already awarded contract. And it's our understanding that yes, you would still need to be doing that. We have a question, again, just to reiterate, yes, we will be sending this presentation to all of you who participated, along with a reference to this recording as well. And I'm going to go ahead from that. Well, as long as we still have folks on, we'll go ahead and answer any other questions, and you'll have that in the recording as well. And there's another question about subcontractors. Yes, this applies to anybody that can be considered a DIB. Those are primes, those are subcontractors of primes. If you are a contractor that's involved in any type of a DoD related contract, all of these rules apply to you. That's why, as you said in the initial area, the numbers are around 300,000. It applies to all of them. So nobody escapes this per se. So another question came across around how much of CMMC is applicable to non-DoD work. Technically, right now, CMMC does only apply to contracts related to the DoD. However, you can almost be assured that this will most likely be extended to other types of contracts because the government in general, we've had enough issues with cyber related contracts that are cyber issues that don't just affect the Department of Defense, they affect our energy department, they affect our finance. So you can expect that they're going to need to have all these in place. And while the VA is an extension, again, it's related to a question about VA, is an extension ultimately of the military, you can expect that that would probably apply to them. And we've seen this also recently with, for those of you that are or not familiar with 889B, 889B was an act that was passed back in 2018 that prohibits anybody working with any type of governmental contract from working with, utilizing specific telecommunication information that has been developed, created by a group, a designated group of companies under, from the People's Republic of China and their subsidiaries. So there's an attestation process that has to be submitted to the SAM and those that states that you're not working with any of those types of companies. So, and that's a program that got extended across the I would say US universe. So if you're a DoD contractor, you also need to make sure you're meeting the requirements of 889B as well. And I know we're continuing to have some folks drop off. We'll go ahead and keep the session open for about another minute or two if there's any other questions. And then again, as I mentioned, all this content will be made available to you. Please, when you receive that, if you would like to be contacted by us for anything regarding products or other information, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to do that. We have also made a note that a few of you have asked to be contacted through this Q&A area, and rest assured we will reach out to you. So I hope this has been an informative session for you all. We appreciate all the folks that joined. Again, we'll be following up with you shortly. And, it's, as we said, while the implementation of CMMC has been somewhat delayed, all the other things that you need to be doing right now under the interim rule. And we can help you with that today, as well as with what will be coming with these future requirements. So we look forward to hearing back from you all, and we wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and a nice holiday weekend. Thank you all for attending, and we appreciate you all being here. Thank you. Bye.